The steel mill roared with the symphony of industry, molten metal, grinding gears, and the steady rhythm of progress. Inside the towering offices of Sandvikens Jernverks AB, a young accountant sat hunched over financial reports, his sharp eyes scanning columns of numbers that others had overlooked. Carl Erik Björkegren was a man of numbers, but more than that, he was a man of vision. Born in Eslöv, Sweden in 1920, he had always possessed an innate ability to see opportunity where others saw limitation. The steel industry was rigid, demanding, and merciless to those who failed to keep pace. But for Björkegren, it was a game, one where strategy, precision, and an unrelenting drive for success set the winners apart from the rest. By the early 1960s, he had maneuvered himself into a powerful position, rising through the ranks with a quiet but undeniable authority. His colleagues whispered about his sharp business instincts, his ability to cut through financial chaos with surgical precision. Promotions followed, first to chief financial officer in 1961, then to deputy managing director in 1965. He had mastered the steel trade, but more importantly, he had mastered money. Yet there was something else, a hunger, not for steel, not for corporate titles, but for something far more elusive, power. The kind of power that didn't come from a corner office or a salary, but from wealth itself. True wealth. Wealth that could bend markets, buy influence, and create empires. By the time he retired in 1981, Björkegren had already laid the foundation for his next move. The boardrooms of Sandvikens had become too small for him. He was stepping onto a new battlefield, one where money didn't just flow, it ruled. He would build an empire unlike anything Sweden had seen before. And for a while, it seemed like nothing could stop him. The cold Swedish air did little to chill the fire burning within Carl Erik Björkegren. Retirement was nothing more than a technicality, a transition from one battlefield to another. While others his age settled into quiet lives of leisure, he was just getting started. With the instincts of a predator, he plunged into the world of high finance, real estate, stocks, art, anything that could be bought, leveraged, and turned into power. He understood wealth in a way few did. It wasn't just about having money. It was about controlling it, about making it move in ways that no one else could predict. The 1980s were a golden age for risk takers, and Björkegren thrived in it. He was everywhere, acquiring prime real estate, making bold stock market plays, and building a private art collection that became the envy of Sweden's elite. Picasso, Miro, Chagall, Grunewald, the names were as grand as the sums he spent. His collection alone was worth 500 million kroner, a symbol of not just his wealth, but his dominance. Banks courted him, investors studied him, the media admired him. In 1987, he was named Private Economist of the Year, a title that solidified his reputation as a financial mastermind. He was no longer just a businessman, he was a force. But the thing about building empires is that they require leverage, loans, investments, and the unwavering belief that the tide will always rise. Björkegren wasn't reckless, but he was ambitious. Every move he made was calculated, every risk weighed. Yet risk has a way of turning on even the sharpest minds. The cracks in Sweden's booming economy were subtle at first, like hairline fractures in glass. Then they spread. The 1990s were approaching, and with them came an economic storm unlike anything the country had seen before. Björkegren had spent a lifetime mastering the art of controlling money. But what happens when money begins to slip from even the strongest grip? The warning signs were there, but Carl Erik Björkegren had seen downturns before. Markets dipped, economies wavered, fortunes swayed like the tide. But for those who played the game well, who understood the deep mechanics of wealth, downturns were just opportunities in disguise. At least that's what he believed. The early 1990s shattered that belief. Sweden's real estate market collapsed. Interest rates skyrocketed. Banks that had once been eager to lend were now scrambling to collect. Investors who had made their fortunes on borrowed money suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of the equation. And Björkegren was among them. Calls from creditors came first, polite at first, then insistent. Assets were reevaluated, Debts recalculated. The numbers no longer played in his favor. By 1991, the unthinkable happened. Carl Erik Björkegren, once one of Sweden's wealthiest and most respected figures, was declared personally bankrupt. The total debt? 1.3 billion kroner, the largest personal bankruptcy in Sweden's history. The headlines were relentless. The man who had once graced the covers of financial magazines was now the subject of scandalous reports. Journalists swarmed. Former allies distanced themselves. Banks that had once praised him now pressed him for answers. But through it all, Björkegren remained composed. He was a man who had built fortunes from nothing before. He would rebuild. He would regain control. Or so he thought. Because on June 2nd, 1994, just as he was preparing for yet another meeting, this time with his lawyer and daughter, something happened. Something that no one, least of all Carl Erik Björkegren, had foreseen. He disappeared. June 2nd, 1994. The morning in Viken, Sweden, was quiet. The kind of silence that settled in the wake of a storm. Carl Erik Björkegren, once a towering figure in finance, was scheduled to leave for Stockholm to meet his lawyer and daughter. Another step in what had become a long, exhausting process. Meetings, negotiations, damage control. His butler, the last known person to see him, left the house briefly. When he returned, something was wrong. Björkegren was gone. His luggage, packed for the trip, had disappeared with him. His car remained untouched in the driveway. No goodbye, no note, no indication of where he had gone. At first, people assumed the obvious. A man burdened by scandal and debt might choose to disappear, to escape the relentless pressure, the suffocating weight of financial ruin. But as hours turned into days, and days into weeks, the questions deepened. If he had staged his disappearance, how had he done it? No records of travel, no reported sightings, no movement of funds. It was as if he had stepped into the air and vanished. Speculation ran wild. Had he been kidnapped? Was there a darker side to his dealings? One that had caught up with him in the form of shadowy figures who wanted him silenced? Some whispered about underworld connections, powerful enemies made during his years at the top. Others wondered if he had planned an escape, slipping away under a new identity, living in exile while the world debated his fate. The police launched a full investigation. Nothing. No ransom demands. No signs of forced entry. His financial accounts remained untouched. The media followed every lead. Dead ends. Years passed. Then a decade. In November 2005, the Stockholm District Court made it official. Carl Erik Björkegren was declared dead in absentia. But was he really dead? Or had he simply mastered the final, ultimate move of a man who had always played the game of wealth to its limits? The world still doesn't know. Carl Erik Björkegren was gone, but his presence lingered like an unfinished equation, one that financial analysts, investigators, and conspiracy theorists have tried to solve for decades. His disappearance left behind more questions than answers, a mystery as deep as the fortunes he once commanded. His art collection, once among the most valuable in Sweden, was slowly dismantled and sold to recover debts. The luxurious estates he had owned became relics of a vanished era, their walls whispering of a man who had once conquered finance and then slipped into the shadows. But his story refused to fade. Some believed he had orchestrated the perfect escape. A man as brilliant as Björkegren, who had built empires and navigated markets with razor-sharp precision, would surely have seen the collapse coming. Had he prepared an exit strategy? Fake identities, hidden accounts, a new life in a distant country? Others were certain he had met a darker fate. Had he crossed paths with the wrong people, powerful figures in finance or beyond, who ensured that his debts were never repaid, not in money, but in silence? Then there were those who entertained the simplest, yet most haunting explanation, that he had reached his limit, that after losing everything, he had walked away from it all, vanishing into obscurity, leaving behind only speculation and myth. Yet, myths have power. Even today, his name resurfaces in hushed conversations about Sweden's greatest financial enigmas. Documentaries attempt to piece together his final moments. Crime reporters revisit old files, and every few years, a supposed sighting emerges. An old man in a cafe, a traveler in South America, a figure glimpsed in the shadows of a foreign city. But the truth? The truth disappeared the day Carl Eric Björkegren did. And perhaps that was his final, most masterful investment, trading the certainty of failure for the immortality of mystery.